I thought I'd have to suffer your tedious lectures forever. I'm rich.
After the carriage accident, the Duke pretended to be unconscious, stunned by what his greedy Duchess said. The carriage wheel snapped, the horses screamed, and as Duke Elliot Williamson's body slammed against splintered wood, the last thing he saw before darkness was his wife's face in the window. Not terrified. Satisfied. When he woke, he couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't even blink. But he could hear everything. The physician declared him comatose, his mind destroyed. The servants wept. And Duchess Phoebe Leach, his wife of 3 years, leaned close enough that her emerald silk gown brushed his motionless hand. "Finally," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. "I thought I'd have to suffer your tedious lectures forever." She laughed, soft and musical, the same laugh that had charmed him at their wedding. "The accident worked perfectly. Now I just need to wait for you to stop breathing, sign a few documents, and everything you own becomes mine." Inside his frozen body, rage exploded like wildfire. But Elliot Williamson hadn't become the most powerful duke in the North by being reckless. If Phoebe wanted him dead, he'd stay dead, until he was ready to rise. But someone else noticed what no one was supposed to see. The new maid standing in the corner, the one everyone ignored, watched as the Duke's finger twitched once. Just once. If you're ready for more stories where the unexpected happens, where the forgotten rise, and where the underdogs turn the game around, make sure to hit that subscribe button now for Forbidden Secret Love Chronicles. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what's on your mind. Your thoughts are always welcome here, and I'd love to hear your take on tonight's story. Don't forget to like, share, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment of the drama, the revenge, and the secrets waiting to be uncovered. Welcome to the family. Now, let's dive in. The journey back to Williamson Manor took 3 hours. Elliot felt every jolt, every bump in the frozen road. His body lay strapped to a wooden board in the back of a wagon, covered in furs that did nothing to warm the ice spreading through his veins. He could hear the physician riding alongside, explaining to the head butler that the Duke's condition was grave, possibly permanent. "Brain fever," the doctor said with the confidence of a man who had no idea what he was talking about. "The trauma to his skull has left him in a state of complete unconsciousness. He may linger like this for days, weeks, or even months. But I'm afraid the Duke we knew is gone." Phoebe rode in her own carriage ahead of them. Elliot couldn't see her, but he imagined her face. Was she still wearing that mask of the grieving wife, or had she already let it slip now that no one important was watching? When they finally arrived, 6 footmen carried him up the grand staircase to the master bedroom, the room he'd inherited from his father, with its dark oak panels and portraits of stern-faced Williamson ancestors staring down in judgment. They laid him on the massive 4-poster bed, arranging his limbs like he was already a corpse being prepared for viewing. "Careful with his grace," the housekeeper, Mrs. Bramwell, sobbed. She'd served the Williamson family for 40 years, and her grief was real. Elliot wished he could comfort her, tell her he was still here, still fighting. But his body betrayed him, with absolute stillness. The physician spent another hour examining him, lifting his eyelids, checking his pulse, listening to his heart. "Strong constitution," he muttered. "His body fights on even as his mind has fled. Keep him warm, turn him regularly to prevent sores, and try to get liquids down his throat when possible. Beyond that, we can only pray." Phoebe stood by the window throughout the examination, her back to the room. She wore black, of course, mourning clothes for a husband who wasn't dead yet. When the physician finally left, promising to return the next day, she remained motionless until the sound of his carriage faded down the drive. Then she turned, and Elliot saw her face transform. The carefully constructed mask of sorrow melted away, replaced by something sharp and hungry. She dismissed Mrs. Bramwell with a wave of her hand, "I'll sit with him for a while," Phoebe said softly. "Alone?" Mrs. Bramwell hesitated. "Your Grace, you should rest. This has been such a shock." I said alone. The sweetness had vanished from Phoebe's voice, leaving only steel. The housekeeper fled, the door closed, and Phoebe approached the bed with the slow, deliberate steps of a predator circling wounded prey. She sat on the edge of the mattress, her weight making it dip slightly. Her hand, still gloved in black silk, reached out and touched his face. The gesture would have looked tender to anyone watching, but Elliot could feel the pressure of her fingers as they traced his jawline, almost testing to see if he would react. "You always were so stubborn," she said conversationally, as if they were having tea. "Even now, your heart keeps beating. Your chest keeps rising and falling, but the physician says you're gone, so I suppose I should believe him." She paused, tilting her head. "Then again, it doesn't really matter either way, does it?" She stood and walked to his writing desk, opening drawers and rifling through papers with no attempt at discretion. 3 years I've played the dutiful Duchess. 3 years of your boring dinner parties and your lectures about responsibility and legacy. Do you know how exhausting it is to smile and nod while you drone on about grain yields and tenant improvements? Elliot's rage built like pressure behind a dam. She'd always seemed so interested in estate management. He'd thought she was intelligent, engaged. It had all been theater. Phoebe found what she was looking for, his personal ledger. She flipped through it, and he saw her eyes widen. £50,000 in the London bank alone, and that's not counting the investments, the properties, the mining shares. She laughed, the sound bright and genuinely delighted. "Elliot, you beautiful, boring man, you're worth even more than I calculated." She set the ledger aside and moved to the wardrobe, pulling out his formal coats and running her hands through the pockets. Looking for what? His keys? Documents? She was methodical, thorough, like she'd planned this search well in advance. "Victor will be so pleased," she said absently. "He's been patient, but his debts are mounting. We'll need to move quickly once you're actually dead. A week of mourning for appearances, then a quiet wedding in France. No one will question a grieving widow, finding comfort in the arms of an old family friend." Victor. Lord Victor Ashford, Elliot's rival for a seat on the King's Council. They'd been at odds for years over northern trade routes. Victor was charming, reckless, and drowning in gambling debts that everyone whispered about, but no one could prove. Phoebe returned to the bed, holding his signet ring up to the lamplight. She must have slipped it off his finger while he was unconscious in the carriage. "I'll need this to access your accounts. The banker won't question a sealed letter from the Duke, especially if his devoted wife delivers it personally with tears in her eyes." She pocketed the ring and leaned down, her face inches from his. "I almost feel guilty," she whispered. "You weren't cruel. You weren't even particularly difficult. Just boring, and far too interested in controlling me. But don't worry, darling. I'll make sure you have a beautiful funeral. The whole North will weep for the tragic loss of Duke Williamson." She kissed his forehead, her lips cold, and then she was gone, leaving him alone with the sound of his own breathing and the thundering fury he couldn't express. The next morning, Mrs. Bramwell came to tend to him, washing his face and hands with warm water, speaking softly about the weather and the kitchen gossip, anything to fill the terrible silence. She tried to get him to swallow some broth, but most of it dribbled down his chin. She wept as she cleaned him up. "Oh, Your Grace," she sobbed. "You don't deserve this. You've always been so good to all of us." Elliot wanted to scream that he was still here, still aware, but his body remained a prison of flesh and bone that refused to obey. 3 days passed in agonizing sameness. Servants came and went. The physician visited and made thoughtful noises while doing nothing useful, and Phoebe played her role flawlessly whenever anyone was watching, dabbing at dry eyes and speaking in hushed, mournful tones about her beloved husband's tragic condition. But on the fourth day, she brought a visitor. Elliot heard them coming down the hallway, Phoebe's light footsteps and heavier boots beside her. She was laughing, actually laughing, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "Are you certain no one will disturb us?" a male voice asked. Smooth, cultured, with an edge of amusement. "The servants know better than to enter without knocking," Phoebe replied. "And even if they did, what would they see? A devoted wife taking tea while watching over her dying husband. How touching." The door opened. Elliot's eyes were partially open, staring at the ceiling as they'd been since morning. Through his peripheral vision, he saw Phoebe enter, followed by a tall man in an expensive coat. Lord Victor Ashford, looking every bit the aristocratic rake with his carefully styled hair and boots polished to a mirror shine. "Good God," Victor said, staring at the bed. "He looks half dead already." "The physician says it could be any day now," Phoebe said cheerfully. She rang for tea, and a maid Elliot didn't recognize appeared within moments, setting up a small table by the window. The girl kept her eyes down, clearly uncomfortable but too well trained to comment. Once the maid left, Victor pulled Phoebe into his arms and kissed her with an enthusiasm that made Elliot's trapped fury burn hotter. They were in his bedroom. He was lying right there, and they were kissing over his supposedly dying body. "Patience, darling," Phoebe murmured, pulling away. "We have business to discuss first." They sat at the tea table, and Victor pulled out a stack of papers. "I've had my solicitor draw up the documents. Once you have access to his accounts, you'll transfer £40,000 to this bank in Paris. That will cover my immediate debts and give us enough to live comfortably while we wait for the rest of the estate to be settled." 40,000? Phoebe's voice sharpened. "The ledger shows at least 50 in liquid assets alone. My debts are significant, Phoebe. Your debts are your problem. I'm not financing your gambling addiction." She poured tea with sharp, angry movements. 20,000 for your debts. The rest stays where I can control it." Victor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fine, 20,000. But I'll need it within the week. Certain gentlemen are becoming impatient." "You'll have it as soon as he stops breathing," Phoebe said, gesturing toward the bed with her teacup. "I can't very well empty his accounts while his heart still beats. Questions would be asked." Victor stood and walked to the bed, looking down at Elliot with cold assessment. "Can't you speed things along? A pillow over the face, perhaps? Blame it on the fever." Elliot's heart hammered, but his body showed nothing. "Too obvious," Phoebe said. "The physician visits daily. No, we wait. Nature will take its course." She paused, sipping her tea. "Or I could ask Cook to add something to his broth. Bitter almonds, perhaps. Just enough to stop his heart. The physician would attribute it to the brain fever." "Brilliant," Victor said, returning to his seat. "You always were clever, my dear." They spent another hour discussing their plans, dividing up Elliot's properties like children splitting sweets. The London townhouse would be sold. The hunting lodge in Scotland would go to Victor. The manor itself Phoebe planned to keep, at least until they tired of it. "What about the servants?" Victor asked. "Most of them will have to go," Phoebe said carelessly. "I'll keep a skeleton staff. The rest can find positions elsewhere." Mrs. Bramwell had worked for the Williamson family since before Elliot was born. Old Thomas, the head gardener, had served his father. They were family, and Phoebe spoke about dismissing them like they were broken furniture. Finally, Victor left, kissing Phoebe once more at the door. "Soon," he promised. "Soon we'll be free." Phoebe closed the door and leaned against it, smiling. Then she walked to Elliot's bedside and patted his hand. "Not long now, darling. I promise to make it quick." That night, after the house had fallen silent, Elliot tried again to move. He'd been trying every hour, every minute, focusing all his will on his fingers, his toes, anything. And finally he felt something. A twitch in his left foot. So small it was barely perceptible, but it was there. He concentrated harder, and his big toe moved. Just a fraction of an inch, but it moved. Hope, terrible and fierce, flooded through him. He wasn't completely paralyzed. Whatever damage the accident had caused, it wasn't permanent. His body could heal. He just needed time. The door creaked open. Elliot's toe went still. Soft footsteps approached the bed, and he recognized the tread. Clara, the new maid. She'd only been hired a month ago. A quiet girl who kept to herself and did her work without complaint. She moved around the room, checking the fire, straightening the bedclothes. Then she paused beside him, and he felt her gaze on his face. "I know you can hear me," she whispered. Elliot's heart stopped. "I saw your toe move 3 nights ago," Clara continued, her voice barely audible. "I've been watching ever since. You moved your finger yesterday morning, just for a second, and tonight, your toe again. Was this it? Was she going to tell Phoebe? Would his wife smother him tonight before he could regain enough strength to defend himself? "I've been waiting for you to wake up, Your Grace," Clara said, and there was something in her voice. Relief? "My real name is Clara Hartley. Your father hired me 6 months before he died. He asked me to watch the new Duchess, to report back if she did anything suspicious." Elliot's mind reeled. His father had suspected Phoebe? His Grace didn't trust her, Clara went on. "He tried to warn you, but you were in love. So he hired me as insurance. When he died suddenly last year, I had my suspicions, but no proof. The physician said it was his heart." She paused. "But I found bitter almond residue in his bedside water carafe. I couldn't prove it came from her, couldn't accuse a duchess without evidence. So I've waited and watched." She moved closer, and Elliot felt her hand take his, her grip warm and steady. "I'm going to help you," she said firmly. "Every night, when the house sleeps, I'll come here. We'll work on getting your strength back. Can you move your toe again? Once for yes." Elliot focused every ounce of will he possessed. His toe twitched. "Good," Clara breathed. "That's very good, Your Grace. We don't have much time. I heard the Duchess talking to Cook this afternoon about preparing a special broth for you. I managed to convince Cook that I should be the one to bring up your meals from now on." The Duchess wasn't pleased, but she couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. She released his hand and moved away. He heard water pouring, cloth wringing. "I'm going to move your legs now," she said. "Small movements, to keep the blood flowing and the muscles from wasting. The physician should be doing this, but he's useless. Try to help if you can. Even the smallest effort will make a difference." For the next hour, Clara worked his legs, his arms, his fingers. She was methodical and gentle, talking the entire time about what she was doing and why. When she moved his left foot, he managed to flex his toes slightly, helping her. "Excellent," she praised. "You're getting stronger already. By this time next week, you might be able to grip my hand." She covered him carefully when she finished, making sure everything looked exactly as it had before. "I'll come back tomorrow night," she promised. "Sleep now, Your Grace. And whatever you do, don't let the Duchess see you move. Not until you're strong enough to defend yourself." She slipped out as silently as she'd entered, leaving Elliot alone with the first real hope he'd felt since the carriage went over. 5 more nights passed. Each one, Clara came and worked with him in the darkness. And each night, he grew stronger. He could curl his toes now, flex his ankles. He could make a fist, though his grip was still weak. His eyes could track movement, though he kept them mostly closed when anyone else was around. Phoebe visited him twice daily, always with that same false sweetness when servants were present, always with cold calculation when she thought they were alone. She'd taken to wearing his signet ring on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her high-necked gowns. On the 6th night, Clara arrived later than usual, her face flushed. "I'm sorry, Your Grace," she whispered, hurrying to his bedside. "The Duchess called a late meeting with the senior staff. She's making changes. Mrs. Bramwell is to be retired next month with a small pension. Thomas, the gardener, as well. She's bringing in her own people. Elliot's hand clenched on the bedsheet. Clara noticed immediately and squeezed his fingers. I know, she said softly. But we're almost ready. Can you lift your hand? He concentrated, and his hand rose off the bed. Not far, perhaps 3 inches, but it rose. Perfect, Clara said. Now, we need to work on your core. If you can sit up, you can stand. If you can stand, you can fight back. They worked for 2 hours that night. Elliot managed to turn his head fully to the left, a movement that seemed simple but felt like a victory. He could bend his knees. He could even, with great effort, lift his shoulders off the mattress. You're healing faster than I dared hope, Clara said, genuine warmth in her voice. Your Grace, I need to tell you something. The Duchess has been forging documents. She's created a will that leaves everything to her, dated 2 weeks before your accident. She's also forged your death certificate, waiting to be filed. The moment you actually die, she'll have everything in place to claim your entire fortune within days. Rage gave him strength. Elliot's hand shot out and gripped Clara's wrist. Not hard, but firmly. Easy, she soothed. Save your strength. We're going to stop her, but we have to be smart. She's dangerous, Your Grace. She killed your father, I'm certain of it now. And the carriage accident? I checked the wreckage. The axle was deliberately weakened, and the horses were dosed with something that made them bolt. This was planned. Elliot released her wrist, his breathing ragged from the effort. Tomorrow night, I'm going to help you sit up, Clara said. The night after, we'll try to get you standing. We need you mobile, Your Grace. The Duchess is planning something. I heard her talking to Lord Ashford about the Winter Gala next week. She said it would be the perfect time to make announcements. The Winter Gala, the biggest social event of the season, hosted at Williamson Manor for the past 50 years. Half the nobility of the North would attend, including the King's representatives. She's going to use the gala to declare you permanently incapacitated, Clara continued. She'll announce her regency over the estate and her intention to manage your affairs indefinitely. And I suspect she plans to make sure you don't survive the night. That night, after Clara left, Elliot didn't sleep. He worked his muscles in the darkness, clenching and unclenching his fists, bending and straightening his legs. His body screamed in protest, but he pushed through the pain. Just before dawn, when the sky outside his window began to lighten from black to gray, he heard the door open. Not Clara's careful footsteps, but Phoebe's confident stride. She crossed the room and stood at the window, looking out at the grounds. In the growing light, Elliot could see her reflection in the glass. She held something small in her hand, turning it over and over between her fingers. His signet ring. I'm going to the bank today, she said to his reflection. A letter bearing your seal, requesting a transfer of funds to cover unexpected medical expenses. They won't question it. Why would they? She turned, and her eyes fell on the bed, but Elliot had already closed his eyes, letting his face fall slack. You're making this so easy, Elliot. I almost wish you'd wake up just so I could see your face when you realize how thoroughly I've beaten you. She walked to the bed, and he felt her lean close, her breath on his cheek. Sweet dreams, husband, she whispered. Not many left now. Through his barely parted eyelids. Elliot watched her lift his hand, sliding his signet ring onto his finger to check the size. She nodded, satisfied, and slipped it off again, returning it to the chain around her neck. That's when Elliot made his move. His hand shot out and gripped her wrist, his eyes flying open to lock with hers. Phoebe's scream echoed through the manor. If you're still here after all that, it shows you find the story interesting. And you're still wanting to know what happens when the Duke finally rises. If so, then do me this one favor. Hit subscribe on Forbidden Secret Love Chronicles. Also, drop a comment and tell me your thought. I read every single comment, and your thoughts matter to me. I'm so glad you're here. Phoebe's scream died in her throat the moment she realized what she'd done. Her face drained of color as Elliot's grip tightened on her wrist. his eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her stumble backward. But she recovered quickly, yanking her arm free and staggering toward the door. "Help!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with manufactured terror. "Someone help! The Duke is having a seizure." Elliot let his hand drop to the bed, his eyes rolling back as he forced his body into stillness. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Mrs. Bramwell burst through the door first, followed by 2 footmen and Clara, who'd been cleaning the hallway. "What happened, Your Grace?" Mrs. Bramwell asked, rushing to Phoebe's side. Phoebe pressed her hand to her chest, breathing hard. "I was checking on him, and suddenly he grabbed my wrist. His eyes opened, but they were wild, unseeing. Then he went still again." She looked at the bed with convincing fear. "Is it normal? Could it be a sign he's waking?" The physician was summoned immediately. He arrived within the hour, examined Elliot with his usual incompetence, and declared it a muscle spasm, nothing more. "The body sometimes has involuntary movements," he explained pompously. "It means nothing. His mind is still gone." After everyone left, after Phoebe retired to her chambers with a headache, Clara slipped into Elliot's room and closed the door softly behind her. "That was dangerous, Your Grace," she whispered, but there was approval in her voice. "But I understand why you did it. You wanted her to know you're still fighting." Elliot's eyes opened fully, tracking her movement as she approached the bed. His mouth worked, trying to form words, but only a rough sound emerged. "Don't strain yourself," Clara said quickly. "Save your voice. We need you strong for what comes next." She helped him sit up, propping pillows behind his back. The room spun slightly, but Elliot gritted his teeth and waited for it to pass. "I heard the Duchess speaking to Cook this afternoon, before all the excitement. She wants a special medicinal broth prepared for you. Something to help you sleep," she said. Elliot's eyes sharpened. "I managed to listen at the kitchen door," Clara continued, her voice dropping even lower. "The Duchess gave Cook a small vial. She said it was a tincture the physician recommended, that it should be added to your evening broth. But Your Grace, I know the smell of bitter almonds. My father was a chemist before he died. That vial contains cyanide." Elliot's jaw clenched. So it was happening. Phoebe had decided he'd lived long enough. "I told Cook I'd bring up your meals from now on," Clara said. "I convinced her my hands are steadier, that I won't spill. She believed me, thank God. But the Duchess is getting impatient. After what happened this morning, she'll move faster." Clara pulled a small notebook from her apron pocket. "I've been documenting everything, every conversation I've overheard, every suspicious action, the forged will, the altered death certificate, the money transfers she's already arranged. But we need more than my word against a Duchess. We need you to expose her yourself, in front of witnesses who can't be bought or intimidated." She was right. Elliot's word alone wouldn't be enough, not when Phoebe had cultivated such a perfect image as the devoted wife. He needed irrefutable proof, and he needed an audience that mattered. Over the next 2 days, Elliot's strength returned with startling speed. Clara came 3 times each day now, morning, afternoon, and night, working his muscles, helping him practice standing, teaching him to walk again with halting, unsteady steps. His voice returned as a hoarse whisper, then grew stronger. "The gala," he rasped on the 3rd night, gripping Clara's arm as he took 5 full steps across the room before his legs trembled. "When?" 4 days, Clara said, helping him back to bed. "The invitations went out weeks ago, before your accident. The Duchess tried to cancel it, but the King's representative sent word that he would attend regardless. She couldn't refuse him without causing offense. 4 days. Elliot had 4 days to be ready. On the 4th day, after his grip on Phoebe's wrist, something strange began happening in Williamson Manor. Small things at first. A book that had been on Elliot's bedside table appeared in the library, placed prominently on his favorite reading chair. One of the maids found it, and assuming someone had borrowed it, returned it to his room. The next morning, it was back in the library, A portrait of Elliot's mother that hung in the main hallway was found turned to face the wall. When the servants righted it, they whispered nervously about drafts and settling foundations. The next day, a different portrait was reversed. Phoebe noticed. How could she not? She stood in the hallway, staring at her own portrait, now hanging upside down, and her face went pale. Who did this? She demanded of the assembled servants. Who's playing these games? No one answered. No one knew. Clara stood at the back of the group, her face carefully neutral, while Elliot lay in his bed upstairs, allowing himself a grim smile. That night, Phoebe came to his room alone. She stood at the foot of his bed, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes darting to every shadow. "I know it's you," she said softly. "Somehow, you're doing this. But it doesn't matter. In 3 days, you'll be gone, and all of this will be mine." She left, and Elliot heard her footsteps pause outside the door. When she finally walked away, her pace was faster, almost running. The next incident was bolder. Elliot's favorite chess set, the ivory pieces his grandfather had brought back from India, was found arranged on the table in Phoebe's private sitting room. The pieces were set mid-game in a position Elliot had played against his father years ago, a position that ended in checkmate for the White King. Phoebe's favorite color was white. She swept the pieces to the floor in a rage, then spent an hour on her hands and knees picking them up, her hands shaking. Lord Victor found her there when he arrived that evening for a secret visit. "What's wrong with you?" he demanded. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," Phoebe snapped. She told him about the incidents, her voice rising with each detail. "The servants swear they know nothing, but things keep moving. His things. It's like he's haunting me." "He's in a coma," Victor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You said the physician confirmed it." "The physician is an idiot," Phoebe hissed. She paced the room, her emerald skirts swishing. "What if he's waking up? What if he heard everything we said? Then we move faster," Victor said coldly. "The gala is tomorrow night. After you make your announcement, after the guests leave, you give him the poison. I'll be here to help you manage the aftermath. By week's end, you'll be a widow, and we'll be on our way to France." Phoebe nodded slowly, but fear had taken root in her eyes, and it was growing. That night, Elliot practiced walking the length of his room 20 times. His legs still shook, his balance was uncertain, but he could stand, he could walk, and most importantly, he could speak clearly enough to be understood. "We're ready," Clara said, watching him complete his final lap. "Your Grace, whatever happens tomorrow, know that I've sent copies of all my evidence to 3 different solicitors in London. If anything happens to you or to me, they'll bring it to the king's attention." Elliot gripped her shoulder, the gesture of gratitude he couldn't yet put into words. The day of the winter gala dawned, cold and bright. Servants swarmed through the manor like ants, polishing silver, arranging flowers, preparing the ballroom that hadn't been used since Elliot's father's funeral. Phoebe was everywhere at once, her commands sharp and precise, her smile brittle as glass. She visited Elliot's room only once, in the early afternoon. The physician was with her, along with Mrs. Bramwell and 2 footmen. "We're going to move His Grace to the East Wing," Phoebe announced. "The noise from the gala will disturb his rest. He'll be more comfortable in the quieter rooms." Mrs. Bramwell looked uncertain. "But Your Grace, the East Wing is so far from the main house. If he needs assistance, I'll have a servant stationed with him at all times." Phoebe cut her off. "The decision is made." They transferred Elliot to a small, cold bedroom in the oldest part of the manor, a room that had been used for storage until that morning. It had 1 narrow window, 1 door, and was far enough from the festivities that a scream wouldn't carry. Clara helped settle him into the bed, her face tight with worry. "I'll try to stay with you," she whispered as she adjusted his blankets. "But she's assigned me to serve in the ballroom. I think she's separating us deliberately." Elliot's hand found hers beneath the covers and squeezed once. "Trust me, the gesture said. As evening fell, carriages began arriving. Elliot could hear them, even from the east wing. The clatter of wheels on gravel, the calls of drivers, the laughter of nobility excited for an evening of entertainment. The Williamson Winter Gala was legendary, and despite the tragedy surrounding the Duke's condition, no one wanted to miss it. Phoebe had outdone herself. Through the narrow window, Elliot could see the main house ablaze with light, every window glowing. Music drifted across the grounds, a string quartet playing Vivaldi. The servant assigned to watch Elliot was a young man he didn't recognize, one of Phoebe's new hires. The boy sat in the corner, looking bored and uncomfortable, occasionally glancing at the bed to make sure his charge was still breathing. At 8 o'clock, Clara appeared with a tray. The Duchess sent His Grace's evening meal, she said to the guard. You may take a break. I'll sit with him while I attempt to feed him. The young man looked relieved and fled. The moment the door closed, Clara locked it. It's time, Your Grace, she said, helping Elliot sit up. The Duchess plans to make her announcement at 9 during the toast. She's going to declare herself regent of your estate due to your permanent incapacity. She's also going to announce her intention to establish a charitable foundation in your name, which is actually just a way to legally move your money into accounts she controls. Elliot swung his legs over the side of the bed. His body protested, but he stood, gripping Clara's arm for support. Can you walk to the ballroom? She asked. I'll crawl if I have to, Elliot said, his voice rough but clear. They made their way through the dark corridors of the East Wing, Elliot leaning heavily on Clara's shoulder. Each step was agony, his muscles burning, his head spinning, but rage drove him forward. Phoebe's face, Victor's sneer, the memory of his father's sudden death, all of it fueled his determination. They reached the servants' passage that ran behind the ballroom. Through the concealed door, Elliot could hear the party in full swing, hundreds of voices blending into a roar of conversation, punctuated by laughter and the clink of champagne glasses. Wait here, Clara whispered. I'll signal you when she begins her speech. She slipped through the door, leaving Elliot in the shadows. He pressed his eye to a crack in the panel and could see slivers of the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers threw sparks of light across ladies in silk gowns and gentlemen in formal coats. At the center of it all, resplendent in a gown of deep crimson that probably cost more than most of his tenants earned in a year, stood Phoebe. She was holding court, surrounded by admirers, playing the tragic Duchess with Oscar-worthy skill. Lord Victor stood nearby, watching her with poorly concealed hunger. The clock struck 9. The string quartet fell silent. A servant rang a small bell, and the crowd quieted, turning toward the dais where Phoebe had positioned herself. My dear friends, she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. Thank you all for coming tonight despite the shadow that has fallen over Williamson Manor. Your presence brings light to these dark times. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. As you know, my beloved husband, Duke Elliot Williamson, was gravely injured in a terrible accident 2 weeks ago. The physicians have done everything in their power, but I must face the truth that many of you have already suspected. She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. The Duke's mind is gone. He will never wake. He will never again lead the North as he once did. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Phoebe raised her hand for silence. Therefore, after much prayer and consultation with legal advisors, I have decided to assume regency of the Williamson estate. I will manage the Duke's affairs, oversee his properties, and ensure his legacy continues even as he lingers in his tragic state. This was met with uncertain applause. Some seemed genuinely moved. Others looked skeptical. Furthermore, Phoebe continued, warming to her performance. I am establishing the Elliot Williamson Foundation for Medical Research, dedicated to helping others who suffer similar afflictions. The Duke would have wanted his fortune to serve a greater purpose. More applause. Louder this time. Phoebe was winning them over. Clara appeared at the edge of Elliot's vision, catching his eye through the crack. She nodded once. Elliot pushed the door open and stepped into the ballroom. The effect was instantaneous. The woman nearest the servants' door screamed, then another. The applause died like a candle snuffed out. A wave of silence spread through the room, as every head turned toward the figure in a nightshirt and robe, gaunt and pale. But unmistakably the Duke of Northwood, walking slowly but steadily toward the dais. Phoebe's face went through a remarkable transformation. Shock, terror, and finally, calculation. She recovered faster than Elliot expected, rushing toward him with her arms outstretched. Elliot. Oh my God. Elliot, you're awake. Someone help him. He shouldn't be out of bed. Her voice was perfect concern, but her eyes were screaming something very different. Elliot stopped in the center of the ballroom. Every eye was on him. The king's representative, Lord Ashworth, pushed through the crowd, his face a mixture of amazement and suspicion. Duke Williamson, Lord Ashworth said carefully, this is extraordinary. We were just told you were beyond recovery. Reports of my incapacity have been greatly exaggerated, Elliot said. His voice carried through the silent ballroom, stronger than he dared hope. Though I'll admit, I've been keeping rather unusual hours lately, listening more than speaking. Phoebe reached him, grabbing his arm. Darling, you must be confused. You've been so ill. Let me help you back to bed. Elliot looked down at her hand on his arm, then into her eyes. Tell me, wife, what was it you said to me as I lay bleeding in the snow? I believe your exact words were, finally, you're silent. I wonder how long it takes a man to bleed out. The crowd gasped. Phoebe's grip loosened. You're confused, she said quickly, turning to the audience. The fever has affected his mind. He's having delusions. Am I? Elliot asked. He pulled free of her grasp and addressed the room. For 2 weeks, I've lain motionless while my wife believed I was comatose. During that time, I've heard some fascinating conversations. Would you like to know what your devoted Duchess really thinks of the North? Of our traditions? Of the people she claimed to serve? This is madness, Phoebe said, but her voice was rising, panic bleeding through. Someone fetch the physician. By all means, fetch him, Elliot agreed. While we wait, let me tell you about the charitable foundation my wife just announced. The one dedicated to medical research. What she didn't mention is that every pound donated will flow into a Paris bank account she controls jointly with Lord Victor Ashford. All eyes turned to Victor, who had gone white as chalk. That's a lie, Victor said, but he was already backing toward the door. Is it? Elliot reached into his robe and pulled out the papers Clara had stolen from Phoebe's desk. These are the account documents, signed and sealed. I also have a forged copy of my will, dated before the accident that nearly killed me, leaving everything to my dear wife. And most interesting of all, I have a death certificate for myself, already signed by a physician, just waiting to be filed. Lord Ashworth stepped forward and took the papers, his face darkening as he scanned them. This is treason, he said quietly. Fraud against a peer of the realm. Attempted murder. No, Phoebe breathed. She looked around the ballroom, seeing only condemnation in every face. No, you don't understand. He's lying. I'm also curious about my father's death, Elliot continued relentlessly. The late Duke died very suddenly last year. Heart failure, the physician said. But I've recently learned that bitter almonds were found in his bedside water. The same bitter almonds that were to be added to my medicinal broth tonight. Clara stepped forward from the crowd, holding a small vial. I have the poison the Duchess gave to cook, she said clearly. And I have testimony from 3 servants who witnessed her meetings with Lord Ashford, during which they discussed how to divide the Duke's fortune after his death. The ballroom erupted. Voices rose in outrage and disbelief. Lord Ashworth raised his hand for silence. Duchess Phoebe Leach, he said formally, I am placing you under arrest by authority of the Crown. You will be conveyed to London to stand trial for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and treason against a peer. Lord Victor Ashford, you are similarly arrested. 2 of Ashworth's men stepped forward, but Phoebe wasn't finished. She lunged at Elliot, her beautiful face twisted with rage. "You were supposed to die," she screamed. "You boring, self-righteous, insufferable man. You were supposed to die, and I was supposed to be free." Elliot caught her wrists as she swung at him, holding her at arm's length. "I know," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "But the North remembers, Phoebe, and the North doesn't forgive." She spat at him. The guards pulled her away and she fought them every step, screaming obscenities that made the ladies cover their ears. Victor went more quietly, his face resigned to his fate. As the guards dragged them from the ballroom, Elliot's legs finally gave out. He would have fallen if Clara hadn't been there to catch him, along with Mrs. Bramwell, who was sobbing with relief, and old Thomas the gardener, who'd pushed through the crowd with tears streaming down his weathered face. "Get the Duke a chair," Lord Ashworth commanded. "And someone fetch an actual competent physician, not that quack who's been attending him." They settled Elliot into a chair, and someone pressed a glass of brandy into his hand. The crowd was buzzing with excited conversation, already turning tonight's events into the story they'd tell for the rest of their lives. Lord Ashworth crouched beside Elliot's chair. "That was quite the performance, Your Grace. Are you truly recovered?" "Getting there," Elliot said, his voice hoarse from the exertion. "Another few weeks, perhaps." "You'll have them," Ashworth said. "And when you're fully healed, His Majesty will want a full account. There will be questions about the former Duke's death as well." "I'll cooperate fully," Elliot promised. Ashworth stood, then paused. "The girl, Clara, your maid. She saved your life. I trust you'll remember that." "I will," Elliot said, looking at Clara, who'd stayed close, ready to catch him if he fell again. "She'll want for nothing as long as I live." The gala dissolved after that. Guests departed in clusters, their voices high with scandal and speculation. By midnight, the manor was quiet again, empty of everyone except the household staff and a contingent of the king's guards who'd been left to secure the property. Elliot sat in the library, a blanket over his legs, staring into the fire. Clara had tried to convince him to return to bed, but he couldn't bear the thought of that room yet, couldn't stomach lying down and staring at the ceiling. Mrs. Bramwell brought him tea and sandwiches, crying as she fussed over him. "I should have known," she kept saying. "I should have seen what she was." "She fooled everyone," Elliot said gently. "Even me. Especially me." One by one, the senior staff came to see him. Thomas the gardener, who'd worked for his father and grandfather. Cook, who'd been horrified to learn the medicine she'd been given was poison. The stablemaster who'd examined the carriage wreckage and confirmed the axle had been deliberately weakened. "We're family," Elliot told them as they gathered in the library. "I've been a poor master, too focused on duty and dignity to see what was right in front of me. That changes now. You saved me. Clara saved me. And I won't forget it." "What will happen to the Duchess?" Thomas asked. "She'll stand trial in London," Elliot said. "The evidence is overwhelming. She'll hang most likely, or be exiled if the crown is feeling merciful." No one looked sympathetic to Phoebe's fate. Over the following weeks, as Elliot continued to recover his strength, the full extent of Phoebe's conspiracy came to light. She'd been planning this for years, cultivating her relationship with Victor, while slowly positioning herself to take control of the Williamson fortune. The carriage accident had been her boldest move, but she'd been laying groundwork long before that, forging documents, building alliances, and yes, almost certainly poisoning the late Duke. Elliot's father had suspected her, had hired Clara to watch her, but he'd died before he could act on his suspicions. Now, posthumously, he'd have his justice. 3 months later, Elliot stood in the same ballroom where he'd exposed Phoebe. But this time the gathering was different. The room was full again, but instead of nobility and silk and jewels, it was his staff, his tenants, and the common people of the North who'd heard about the Duke who'd literally risen from the dead to reclaim his birthright. "I've asked you here today," Elliot said, his voice strong now, his body fully healed, "because I want to make a promise. The old ways of running this estate, where decisions were made behind closed doors and the people who actually did the work were ignored those days, are over." He gestured to Clara, who stood at his right hand wearing a fine dress instead of a maid's uniform. "Clara Hartley saved my life and exposed a conspiracy that would have destroyed everything my family built. She is now my chief advisor and will have a voice in every major decision affecting this estate." Applause erupted. Clara blushed, but stood tall. "Mrs. Bramwell, Thomas Cook, and the rest of the senior staff, you're no longer just servants. You're my counsel, your experience, your knowledge of these lands and these people. That's invaluable. I want your input. I want your honesty, and I want to build something better than what we had." More applause, and this time Elliot saw tears on weathered faces, saw hope where there had been resignation. "The North remembers," he said, using the words that had become his rallying cry. "We remember loyalty, we remember sacrifice, and we remember that power means nothing if it's not used to protect the people who depend on us." The celebration lasted until dawn. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and for the first time in years, Williamson Manor felt like a home instead of a monument to duty and isolation. Later, as the sun rose over the grounds, Elliot stood at the window of his study with Clara beside him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Trusting her? Marrying her? Every day," Elliot admitted. "But the regret taught me something important. Position and power don't matter if you surround yourself with people who only want those things from you. Real loyalty, real trust that's earned through action, not title." Clara smiled. "Your father would be proud of you, Your Grace." "I hope so," Elliot said. He looked out at the land he'd almost lost, at the people he'd almost abandoned, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. "And Clara, I've told you 100 times. Call me Elliot," she laughed. "Never going to happen, Your Grace." And perhaps that was how it should be. Some formalities mattered. Some traditions were worth keeping, but the ones that protected corruption and isolated leaders from the people they served, those could burn. The North remembered, and the North would rise again, stronger than before. "I need you to understand something. This story, this moment where justice finally wins, where the person who refused to give up gets to stand and reclaim everything that was stolen, it only exists because someone decided it mattered. Because you decided it mattered by reading this far. These stories need you. Not just to watch them, but to share them, to keep them alive by telling others. You need to see this. That's how stories survive. That's how the underdogs keep winning. So here's what I'm asking, truly asking. Subscribe to Forbidden Secret Love Chronicles. Not because I need the numbers, but because you deserve more stories like this, and I can't keep creating them if they disappear into the void unwatched and unshared. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you thought. Tell me which moment hit you hardest. Your voice matters here, and I read every single word. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to believe that bad people don't always win. Ring that notification bell so you're here when the next story drops. You showed up for Duke Elliot. Now show up for the next person who needs their story told. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. You're the reason these stories exist. Don't forget that.